2014. His work has appeared in the Milwaukee Journal, the Seattle Times, the Dallas Morning News, and he was quoted on multiple occasions in stories printed in the New York Times. In 2012, Steve authored a 1,500-word cover story about the history of development and architecture in Oklahoma City for the magazine Architectural Record. So with that, Steve, you want to come on up and introduce our other speakers? Thank you.
You're very kind, AJ. Thank you. First of all, I hope a lot of you got to read the start of what will be a series of stories in yesterday's paper. In weeks to come, I've had extensive conversations with the Association of Central Oklahoma Governments, and I hope to speak to some folks from some of the suburbs about the ongoing effort to get some regional transit going on. We're going to be looking at retail corridors, especially ones that have been fading, and how OKC Plan suggests trying to strengthen them as well as our city continues to grow. There'll be a piece on sidewalks, and we'll continue this. This is a good discussion to have. As background, this isn't my first time looking at planning. So if some of you are like, well, how did you end up going from urban development back to doing this kind of planning coverage? Well, the bosses started hearing about some of the population expectations we have coming, and they're pretty dramatic, and we've seen some dramatic growth. And back in the late 90s, myself and former colleague Jack Money did a series of stories looking at efforts to change our growth patterns and planning then. It didn't go as well as I perceive it's going now. I think we've got a city that's a little bit more in tune with that. And quite honestly, we could have had a full panel of folks up here for us to talk to. And instead, I wanted to invite two people who really deal with this more than anybody else at City Hall. And that is Eric Winger. And Eric is the, I'm going to pull up their bios here real quick. Eric, you know, I first started noticing Eric's involvement at City Hall back in the late 90s. He was involved with trying to get the arena situation fixed. There was a lot of complications that went on, and he had much less gray hair. I think that's where the gray hair started. He followed Jim Couch's pattern, path there. But he rose through the ranks. He actually started the city back in 1994 as a junior civil engineer after graduating OU. And except for a brief stint at Johnson & Associates, he has spent his career in the city's public works department. In addition to MAPS 3, he also oversees 6 divisions that include administration, engineering, stormwater quality, traffic management, street maintenance, and field services. So you can see where Eric's got a little bit to oversee here. Eric, thank you for joining us, and if you can come up here on the seats, and I'll join you all in a minute. Let me also introduce Aubrey Hammondtree. Aubrey is also an OU grad. Like Eric, she spent her career with the city's planning department. She came to Oklahoma City in 2000 as an associate planner. She was named an assistant director of planning in 2013. She had a lot of involvement in OKC Plan, that really the first new comprehensive plan we've had since 1977. And she was named director in 2014. Aubrey oversees 4 divisions: planning and urban design, long-range planning and redevelopment, housing and community development, and administration. Aubrey, thank you for joining us today. I also want to thank ULI Oklahoma for agreeing to co-host this lunch with the Oklahoman. It is part of our Behind the Headlines series. When we talked about doing something like this, my first response to the editors was, let's not reinvent the wheel. ULI does a great job with these kind of luncheons and conferences and forums, and we got to go with ULI. So thank you to Deshaun and everyone at ULI, Cameron, AJ, for working with us in a relatively short period of time to make this possible. And I understand we got a sold-out crowd today. So thank you for joining us. What we're going to do is I'm going to start off with some questions for Eric and Aubrey. And as we're going along, if you've got questions, I'd like you to go ahead and write them on cards on your table and submit them to me, and I will ask the questions as they come in. Okay? So let's start off. First of all, I need a raise of hands. How many of you are familiar with OKC Plan or read part or all of the stories on Sunday? Good. So we got a good start here. There are some of you in the crowd I might ask a question to. I promise you I won't be a nasty, mean ambush, okay? I'll try to only ask questions of you that I know I have a pretty good idea you have the answer to. So like John Yokel, Richard McCowan, Jimmy Patch, several of you, you're on warning now. Yeah, can all of you hear me? I mean, I've got a pretty big mouth anyway. So the first question is to both of you. Plan OKC is a huge document. Aubrey, can you hold it up? I did read it all. We used it extensively in the package yesterday, and we'll be using more in weeks to come. How much did both of you and your staffs spend working together on Plan OKC? How were things done differently this time compared to earlier efforts? I know you weren't here in 1977, but during the updates, and what you can see happened in the past.
Well, I wasn't here in 1977, but I was here in 2000 when we did our last plan update. And I think that the way that we tried to interact with the community and the way that we worked with city departments was different this time, because we realized that we all need to be on the same page with where we're going. Each department has its own expertise and its own understanding of its needs and the public's needs. So we needed to sit down at the table in the beginning of the process this time, talk about what's working, what challenges are happening. So in the very beginning of the process, before we even did a public outreach effort, we formed what's called the city staff working groups. So we took members appointed by the director, sometimes the director was involved in these city staff working groups, to identify what the city's issues were for providing service and some of those challenges that we think the community might end up reaffirming through the public outreach process. So city staff was involved from the get-go. We had these teams that collaborated. We went back and forth as we had public outreach and dialogue with the community. We worked on possible strategies and possible goals that the city could do or the city could support as we got feedback from the community. So it was a beginning, middle, and end type of a collaboration with our city staff.
So I think what I can probably share is just from a view from the Public Works Department. Now realize in the city there's a lot of other departments that were involved in these smaller working groups that Abby just mentioned. So when we talk about parks or we talk about transit or we talk about some of the other major departments, they all had an opportunity to review, but then Public Works did as well. So when we're looking at things like streets, when we're looking at sidewalks, when we're looking at growth areas, those are all things that we had an opportunity to comment on prior to its approval. So obviously getting that buy-in very early in the process, being able to actually look at that draft document multiple times, and I think Aubrey mentioned this occurred over a course of years. This wasn't something that happened over just a few months. And so it allowed us to reach out to a lot of the different divisions of Public Works. So we had our paving divisions looking at issues. We had our traffic divisions looking at different issues, making sure that we can incorporate the information. But I think what you also find in the plan is a lot more common terminology. So a lot of times where you'll find that there's maybe some engineering terminology that may be a little bit different than the planning terminology, able to consolidate that as well. But moving forward, obviously what's so important with the plan is to have something that's been adopted as a policy of the City of Oklahoma City that now the department can stand behind and use and not have a lot of the questions with it that we would have had without. So obviously just that integration of staff throughout was very important to us in Public Works.
Quick follow-up question, Aubrey. As you went through this process compared to the 2000 process, do you sense there's a greater awareness or interest in the community in planning and smart growth, or I don't mean to use a buzzword, smart growth, but growing smartly, and to give a kudo to ULI, I imagine there are groups out there and online discussions that probably help in that. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Were any of you involved in 2000 when we did the plan update? I know that John Yokel will raise his hand. So a few of you were involved, and I know that the public outreach process in 2000 was more of setting public meetings, like maybe at 7 p.m. on a Thursday evening. And it was an open process, and that was just the way that people did public outreach and planning in past eras. And it's proven to be one of those methods that only reaches a few people but not everyone. So when we looked back at the type of feedback and public participation that we got in the 2000 plan, we realized that there were groups and a demographic out there that was working to make change in the community that may not be the type of group that could take off at 7 p.m. on a Thursday evening and participate. So we expanded those outreach efforts. At the same time, we're seeing Oklahoma City change, and we're seeing a lot of entrepreneurial development. We're seeing a lot of infill. We're seeing different people coming in from outside of Oklahoma City that are wanting to know what our rules and processes are. So in the past 20 years, I think that our dynamic has grown to the point that there is so much more interest in how we're growing and how people can become a part of this wonderful place where we can live, work, and play. So ULI, I think, has been one of those agencies, too, that has started these conversations. It's organizing people together behind development and behind practices that might be smart growth type practices. So I think that dialogue over the last 20 years, the economic development, the resurgence of all of our initiatives through the MAPS program, downtown revitalization, they've all played out over this period of time that people are very, very interested in our future here, very invested in that, and wanted to be a part of this conversation. So a lot of our online type of dialogue and other mechanisms to get feedback were very positive for us in this go-round.
And let me point out, there's one of the things that we wanted to do differently this time, and I would say that even late 90s, Jack and I maybe got caught up in this, and it's easy to get into this with a bias of sprawl is bad. It's easy to get into this with we're too big, just automatically assume that. And for matter of fact, there was quite a debate internally in the newsroom about calling our series too big. And we've got to go beyond that. In reading the plan and talking to all of you, I get the impression this isn't so much about whether we're too big. It's not about trying to curb growth. I've had some very good discussions with Councilman David Greenwell and others. Not all growth is bad, but as Mayor Cornett pointed out in the story, you can't keep on building dense apartment complexes on the fringe. You've got to grow smartly. And so everything I've heard from you guys is about not curbing growth, not penalizing home builders who want to build a memorial or off of Rockwell, but rather, can we guide folks? Can we do some mechanisms that'll create smarter growth? Can you talk about that, Aubrey?
Thank you. Yeah, the comprehensive plan is our guide for managing growth. This is the kind of the rule of thumb that we use when we evaluate development proposals as they come into the city. I would say that cities, the expectation of cities is they grow organically, and there are ebbs and flows for a city in spurts of development that come over time. Oklahoma City has had such a dynamic and rich past and a culture that starting with the land run, and then there's the oil bust, and there are resurgences that happen in the course of a city growing up that we are in a point in time right now where our city has not had any of those kind of natural barriers that restrict growth to certain places, like some cities who might have a river or a mountain range or an ocean that really concentrate development in a certain part of their structure. So Oklahoma City, in that it's flat, it is affordable, it's in the middle of the country, it has interstate highways connecting, it has made Oklahoma City successful in and of itself for development. So what we're dealing with right now is trying to guide development in a way that is efficient, that protects our quality of life, that protects the way that we can provide services to our community, that the growth that we experience is positive for everybody, and putting in new businesses, places where people can play and work. So really that's what the conversation is about, is guiding Oklahoma City to the next level, knowing we have a ton of potential and a ton of opportunity here. But it can't be done willy-nilly. and other cities, this is the profession of planning. Other cities that have had success like this might leap a little bit forward and take a couple steps back and go a little bit forward again. So we're not unlike other cities in that regard. It's just that we are different in that we have highly developable, highly affordable land, readily available and accessible to a lot of the great things that we're here for.
My next question was for Eric. And we visited about one of these this last week. When I was talking to Gary Brooks about Chisholm Creek and the apartments he's about to put in over there at Western Memorial. You know, they're paying part of the costs. They're teaming up with the city to catch up on some water utilities and infrastructure. So the developer teamed up with the city to catch the area up to support this dense but very creative, unique mixed-use development, okay? And there's other examples. I remember the city doing this with the developers of Belle Isle, Walmart, and all that. So this is not unusual. But I also encountered while driving around off of Memorial Road, I saw a intersection that's not really an intersection. It's on Rockwell Avenue, just north of Memorial Road. And it's a full set of traffic lights that were put in. I looked at Google Earth. It's been there a while. And what I found out was that was done with the developer, and they split the cost. You know, the costs were split, and that was done. And developer, whether they get to it or not, that's the developer's timeline. And so what I wanted to find out on that was, are there steps that the city can take to look at maybe putting some more parameters on when that is appropriate or when the city is going to invest that money? Does that make sense?
Sure. So I think to kind of talk about the city as a whole, and we'll focus on Memorial Road a little bit too, but there's a lot of growth in a lot of the areas of the city, and I think one of the things that promotes growth are the developers, and several are here in the room today. And obviously the finances that back those. And so a lot of times when we start talking about a plan, there is a need for a plan to be able to project where that growth is going to occur. But there's also landowners and plans that are conceived that need to be aligned with that plan. There's been a lot of development in the past that didn't get to take advantage of Plan OKC. So this plan moving forward is going to help us strategize and be able to respond better as a city. But in the past, as we justify a lot of the different developments that have been assisted by the city, whether we look at Chisholm Creek, when we look at different opportunities even in the downtown area, if we even look far south, there's a new Walmart on Interstate 44 and Southwest 104th, all which were a part of a plan that was addressed to the city with a need to bring traffic signals up to standards, to bring utilities up to standards. And I think what you're going to find in a lot of those cases, the city council, as the policymakers, are considering those on a case-by-case basis. But then again, they will use Plan OKC, I believe, going into the future to make sure that it's, again, trying to address this smart growth opportunity. But there's going to be some opportunities for developers that are either going to do the work on their own without the city. If there are properties that are already zoned to be developed, I mean, that is something that's allowed and will move forward. But there's these other cases where you do have these specialty sites that come into the view, and we just look at those one at a time. But they're going to be done in conjunction with city departments. They're going to be done with the city council, the planning commission, and others, you know, moving these forward.
I mean, but has the city looked at, okay, maybe we need to have a timeline to make sure that if we're putting in our half, that there is development following?
So I think to answer the question about does it actually happen, you know, there are developments that are rapid developments. Walmart clearly is going to build a new Walmart supercenter in less than a year. Chisholm Creek, multi-year development that's occurring between Penn and Western on Memorial. There's other growth that we're seeing in North Oklahoma City that maybe has a less defined timeline, but growth is happening. I think what we have to understand is that there's uncertainty. And when you look at the economy today, you know, I'm sure that there were decisions made a couple of years ago that have radically changed for certain developers, and I don't know that we have control of that. Finances fall through, plans change, but I do think with the information that we have at the time that we're making good decisions. I think that that's, again, something that's supported by the council, but it's subject to change. And so, yeah, I guess there will be an opportunity every now and then that something may not proceed as quickly as it could have. perhaps it may have changed dramatically. And I think we see that in other areas of the city when we talk about growth and regrowth. When we start talking about the resurgence of downtown and what's happening with all the downtown buildings, their original plans are clearly changed in going into this 21st century.
Aubrey, I also discovered during the reporting for this series that some of the dense apartment development we're seeing on the fringe, especially where it overlaps Deer Creek schools, involves land that was zoned R3 years, if not decades ago. Maybe with a different city council, with different motivations, maybe by planning department that didn't think about what it meant to build apartments on the fringe. But as I'm learning about all this, I'm wondering, is there any way, or has there been any discussion on whether the city can take steps to discourage such use or reverse that zoning or incentivize against it?
Well, that was a point of conversation in how this comprehensive plan is legally applied to property that has zoning. If you have zoning in place and you have the right to develop that property under that zoning, this guide, this land use guide, cannot reverse the zoning that's in place. So some of those decisions that were made years ago in anticipation of development, like Eric was talking about, that may have changed the character, it's really one of those things is as it plays out, you can still develop that under that R3. Chances are, if things have changed around it though, that the property owner might have a different idea in mind. Maybe the property owner doesn't want to do apartment complexes but wants to do a mixed use development. So if those developers come back to the city to ask to change that zoning, it is very likely when they consult the comprehensive plan that there might be some triggers that would lead them to developing something more specific like a planned unit development. This comprehensive plan really does guide development that is compatible with its neighbors, that has a lot of guidance on the appropriate density, the appropriate urban character and form, the architectural style. It walks you through all of those considerations to ensure that what is going to be built today is something that's going to last and be sustainable in the future. And those are some of the things that were not considered years and years ago when we just used straight zoning or went in and put a C3 commercial intersection at the crux of two arterial streets out in a rural area. There still is that zoning across Oklahoma City, and we're thinking that it's probably unlikely that it will come in and develop under that zoning district, and then we have an opportunity to address it with the new comp plan.
Another question I've got, and by the way, if y'all have questions, make sure you write out a card and send them toward me. This is to both of you. Eric, we'll start with you. We know the city has limited resources, 321 square miles, and that involves a lot of services. And one theme that's come through time and time again from everyone I've talked to is the status quo we had was unsustainable. Is that correct? The status quo wasn't going to continue without either a cut in services or some way to increase taxes. So as I think about that, again, this isn't to say there's any area, when I ask you to answer this, I'm not saying, tell me what development you don't want to see happen. What I'm asking, though, is what area of town do you worry about the most in terms of rapid growth and insufficient current infrastructure and services?
So I think, as I mentioned, there's a lot of growing areas of the city, and anytime we have rapid growth, I think the thing that we've got to talk a little bit about, and it's the resources that we have for paving roads, for widening roads, for infrastructure, water. We rely heavily on the bond issues here in Oklahoma City to do a lot of our planning and our future infrastructure improvements, and that really goes towards most of the road work that you see in Oklahoma City. The last bond issue, which is nearly $800 million, 500 million of that just went to paving alone. So again, we are projecting that out. There's two parts. Some of that is widening. Some of that's also resurfacing, but road infrastructure. A lot of that was focused in north central Oklahoma City, which was projected as a growth area in the last bond issue in 2007. So a lot of road work has occurred there. I think we still have some concerns about increased traffic, not just the roads themselves, but increasing traffic and traffic control in north central Oklahoma City. But I'll share that even in the downtown areas, we start to see a lot of the downtown areas start to revitalize too. We're starting to see those patterns starting to reoccur as we start doing a lot more on-street parking, as we start to make them more pedestrian friendly. We're having to plan for things in downtown that were never planned before. And so that's just something that's another big challenge for us. And those are really short-term types of things that I think about. I think something that Aubrey and I will share is longer term as you start seeing other plans for turnpike expansions and you start looking at west and say even east Oklahoma County. I'm going to focus a little bit on west and southwest, but we do see as new roads are constructed there that there's going to be some continued growth, that we're going to have to be very capable planners, and we're going to have to come up with some engineering plans as well to make sure that the infrastructure in those areas, as those areas of Oklahoma City are expanded, are taken care of. But so I think really two from me, some short term what we're seeing with just the natural growth of Oklahoma City, especially north and north central. The continued growth just here downtown as well is a challenge, but then long term I think southwest Oklahoma City.
That was exactly what I was going to say too. And our planning commissioners might have a different perspective on that as well. We see applications coming in all around Oklahoma City. One of the big things that we see though is a continued desire for people to have a rural lifestyle but be within that 10-minute drive to our downtown. And so there are proposals that come in almost every single planning commission meeting to want to subdivide large acreages into rural subdivisions of maybe 2-acre size. So southwest Oklahoma City is one of those areas of high desirability, and I think because of the turnpike planning to extend, that's going to be one of those areas where we see probably the next wave of growth happening in the more immediate future, immediate to a planner being 10 years. But those are the two areas I would have cited as well.
First ambush question, John Yokel. So John, you've been on the planning commission a while. What is it, 2000? So we both got to know during that era. She was just talking about applications, and you see these applications coming in. Are you seeing any trend yet for southwest part of town where the turnpike's coming in? Where do you see the growth momentum going right now, just to fill in the blanks there?
Well, we have been getting more applications in the southwest sector of the city lately, and it's an area that is somewhat lightly served by services in terms of infrastructure and even other services which are also very important to the city: police, fire. So, I mean, we have things beyond physical infrastructure that are issues in different areas. And we are seeing more of that. I think we need to be mindful of a balance. I mean, the city needs to grow, wants to grow, and should grow. But we sometimes get applications, and the mayor stressed it a bit, we'll get dense apartment applications on the extreme ends of the city. And a lot of times, that's not necessarily beneficial to the city fiscally. And I'll give you an example of myself. I live in North Oklahoma City. The 3 closest supermarkets to me are all in Edmond. My sales tax dollars aren't necessarily coming into Oklahoma City. So we need to look at what those costs are to the city for the kind of development that's occurring in particular places. And Aubrey brought up another point that I thought was interesting, going back to what we look at the Planning Commission on a regular basis. We're looking at a city that was zoned in many cases 30 plus years ago, and it's a very different city today. So one of the things we're mindful of on the Planning Commission is thinking about the impact of the decisions we recommend to the City Council now, because somebody will be looking at that 20 or 30 years from now and saying, what were they thinking? How did that happen? And that's an important thing for us to be aware of. And also, every time we get an application, we're aware of all of the people around that application. The consideration isn't just the applicant and what that applicant wants to do today, but how does it relate to the built environment around it and the people who either live or work in that built environment around it? So it's a balance of trying to work with what an applicant wants to do and also what's in place and the people who are in place.
I've got a related question from a person here. And there's going to be more coverage on the impact of the turnpikes in the ensuing weeks. Person wants to know, while I support development that encourages redevelopment of the inner city and mid-city area, the need for an east bypass on the turnpikes around the city is evident to those of us who want to keep hazardous materials transport out of the central city. Can both concepts coexist? So it sounds like we've got an inner city person that's wanting the turnpikes as a means to just keep the hazardous transport out of the city and in the rural areas, it sounds like. Am I saying that right? And I'm not sure how the rural folks feel about that. If you can answer that real quick. Or, Eric? I mean, is there a way to design this turnpike and development around it for that?
So I'm going to answer the question with a different answer, though. I think if those that in the room, if you follow the turnpike discussion and the need for the turnpike in East Oklahoma County, it's really more of a bypass relief to Interstate 35, which is starting to see a significant amount of congestion. And so as they look at plans that ODOT has for the interstate system, as they look at plans for what the turnpike can also provide in partnership with ODOT and the funds that are available through the state, the east bypass is really just that. It's to take that load off of 35 as you're trying to get out to the Turner Turnpike. And so the hazardous question or materials question, I don't know that I could specifically answer this. I'm sure that if that's a more convenient way for trucks that are heading from northbound I-35 to get to Tulsa, and this is a safer and a better route, I'm sure that they'll use it, but to designate it as a hazardous route only, I'm not sure that I probably am the best to answer that.
Thank you. One question I never asked in all this. We're not looking at annexing any land right now, or are we? So is there a possibility we could see land annexed with the turnpikes? Okay, so whoever asked a question about annexing land, I'm going to skip that one unless you see another issue there. Another question I wanted to ask you all is, it seems like, at least in the previous bond issues, we've seen a tendency to 4-lane roads stretched out to the suburbs. Whether it was in the 80s and 90s ones on the southwest side or now in the northwest, north central side. Do you see a change in the next bond issue in how road projects are prioritized? I know there's a lot of council policy set here, but from what you're observing, both of you, is the emphasis still going to be on 4-laning streets, or is there going to be a change, do you think?
So I think, one of the things as we talk today, and we talk about Plan OKC and how it's developed, and I'll let Aubrey fill some of that in, but there has been huge technological advances in how we're able to collect data, whether it's on traffic, whether it's on zoning and population and census, and merge all that into a database, a GIS system, that helps us now in this next bond issue to make better decisions. And so I think in the past, I think that probably the city leaders, the planners, and the engineers were a little bit handicapped, actually, because they had to look at a piece of data one at a time. They may look at a traffic count, or they may look at a condition of the street, or they would then have to consider it what it was zoned or what it wasn't zoned, and trying to project that growth manually. Now, I'm not going to say it's completely automatic, but when you can see all the data at once and you look at some of the mapping and some of the technology that's already in Plan OKC documents, we can simply overlay a lot of the engineering on top of the planning and see it in one snapshot, and it helps us make a lot better decisions. So moving forward into the next bond issue, you can expect that as we make traffic projections and counts and we overlay those with the plans for growth, if we see alignment, meaning we do see growth and it's also a road that needs to be widened, I think absolutely you're going to see some roads that need to be widened in the next bond issue. There's clearly a focus in the next bond issue on roads, period, and it's really the quality of roads. I think what you're probably going to see more of than just typical widenings is a lot of resurfacing in Oklahoma City. I think you're going to see a new third category of streets. Now, we used to just call them streetscapes, but a streetscape of 2007 is a very different streetscape for those that have seen some of the recent work in Oklahoma City when we start talking about a more complete type street. We've taken into account not just the walkability, but you've taken into account the business owners, you've taken into parking, you've taken in transportation and all those things. I think you're going to see us a few projects like that maybe also included as well. So it's going to be a more complete bond issue with a lot better planning, a lot better engineering, but it's really the combination of those plans that's going to make it possible.
Follow-up question on sidewalks. If I understand correctly, you've been somewhat restricted on previous bond issues in terms of new sidewalks that were attached to street projects, or as with MAPS 3 or additional funds out by city council. Do I understand correctly, in the next bond issue, there can be sidewalks without it, like you could do a sidewalk on Laura Road where there's not one without it would be a street project. Is that right?
So if not everybody heard the question. In the last bond issue, I think one of the things that you'll have maybe read in Steve's article yesterday is that there's 275 miles of sidewalk that were included in the bond issue, all of those occurring along the same routes that the streets were voted. And so yes, in this next bond issue, it does look like we're going to have the opportunity. Now it's a policy decision of the council to do this as we move it forward, but to have sidewalk-only projects that don't necessarily also go with the streets. And so it'll help supplement a lot what was already done in MAPS 3, where MAPS 3 put in miles and miles of new sidewalk without a street. We're hoping to have that opportunity in the next bond issue as well.
I wanted to maybe fill in on some of the things that Eric mentioned in using the comprehensive plan as a tool to help guide priorities of investment. We know that our general obligation bonds are not going to be able to address every single need that every citizen wants or needs in the process, but this plan has a capital improvements planning chapter in it. And what it does is it breaks down all of the different things, all the services that the city provides, and it gives considerations for criteria for prioritizing investment. So for example, on streets capacity, the first thing that we look at is how far those dollars go to serve the greatest benefit or the greatest population possible. So easy fixes would be the first priority. Network impact on the entire network and trying to get people where they need to go and help increase connectivity of the network. Development responsiveness. So this is trying to add capacity to support development that we know is happening or where we want it to happen and occur. Streets projects, same thing. We would look at easy fixes, network impact, and complete streets as being our priority. Sidewalks, the first thing is to put sidewalks in a place where there are responsive populations, people who need them, that would use them to the greatest extent possible. Next is connectivity to schools and parks, then connectivity to existing sidewalk networks, then neighborhood revitalization and urban commercial districts. So those are the filters that we would run all of the proposed projects through so that we can see how far those bond dollars could go to serve the greatest population and the greatest benefit. So it's that balancing act, again, with the information that Eric mentioned, street index that looks at the condition and the rating of the street. We know where we need to improve the quality of streets, and then we know who those streets are going to serve and how they should be built out in the future.
Let's talk about schools a little bit. That's a big issue with our city's growth. I want to add, by the way, one of the things I hope you're hearing is when we talk about city growth, it's not just a fringe issue. We've got tremendous growth in the urban core that the city is also trying to stay up with. So I don't want this to come across as a let's beat up the fringe, because that's not what's going on here. We've got growth going on throughout the city. It's a great thing. But again, we're being told we have to change the way we do this. So again, with the schools, I'm not sure if some of you read the apartment story I had yesterday, but I was talking to the superintendent of Edmond Schools. And Mr. Town was talking about this real problem they've got, that there's been an awful lot of apartments built along Memorial Corridor where it overlaps Edmond Schools. He is not against apartments. He said it repeatedly. But he's got a problem, and that is Charles Haskell and Angie DeBow are surrounded by a lot of these apartments and dense housing developments, and they're maxed out, and there's no place to build another school to serve this development. So we've got issues like that rising. Meanwhile, we've got cards coming in about, well, are we dealing with some elitism because everyone's wanting to flock to these schools on the fringe. And another person asks, assuming excellent education outcome for our city's children is a part of the smarter growth definition, how do the city planners work with the school districts, all 27 of them?
I wish it were better, but we're trying to get there. We have a task force, a public education joint task force, and this has been going on now for several years, where we can sit down at the table and talk about working together, where the city and the school district can do programs, incentives, create a better synergy between being responsive to development that is kind of outside of any of our control, and we can't anticipate where a project might come in, but being able to communicate needs better. I know that as a part of that dialogue, we've talked to the school district about giving feedback on our applications for new development, where they have an opportunity to provide some background to the Planning Commission when they base decisions on projects, to be able to chime in on those reports, and also the location of new facilities. The comprehensive plan is really trying to look for opportunities in our city to co-locate facilities so that a school could be next to a library, that could be next to a park, so that the school may not have to build the playground, but the children could use the park. And that way it reduces the amount of land that you have to construct, and it really just creates a great synergy of community dynamic. So we would really love to partner more with the school district. It's one of those conversations that you keep having it and you keep realizing there's more to be discussed. So it is a very complicated formula, and I know that in talking to planners in other cities, this is one of the big challenges that they have. I think that Oklahoma City even has more challenges in that we have 27 different school districts that we have to work with across our city. So that dialogue has been happening, and I think it could just get better, but it is a challenge.
When you go to planning conferences, how many of your peers have that many districts to deal with?
None.
Well, Eric, you've got to deal with this as well on roads. How is that coordination? You're talking more with the school districts now too, aren't you?
So we do visit with school districts quite a bit, and as we've mentioned, there's a couple dozen school districts in Oklahoma City. I won't say that the conversations are equal. I will tell you that in our growing districts, they do visit with the Department of Public Works quite often to at least share with us where their projected schools are going in. I don't think it's a surprise. School sites are typically the cheapest sites that they can find. They're typically a 2-lane rural road with no curb and gutter. They've got bar ditches, and then they're going to load it with 800 kids and school buses and all the parents that go and pick them up and drop them off. And it's a challenge. But what is helpful for us, and I'll speak on a lot of conversations we've had with the city of Moore, who's opened up 2 and almost 3 schools now just since I've been back in Public Works the last 5 years. They're giving us a heads up. So we're having opportunities to do some short-term projects to help make sure that the road infrastructure is adequate for when that school reopens. And then it goes on to the radar for this next bond issue, so that if it does need a widening, a tree widening, where we actually need to put in extra capacity on that street, it's an opportunity that we can take. But that conversation is pretty active. Not all the districts are doing it, but a lot of the major districts are.
Can we take another 15 minutes here? Y'all okay with that? You can take the mic away from me. Deshaun knows how to do that. Y'all okay with that? Okay. How many of you, when I meet with a group like ULI, I assume that there's some understandings among you that isn't found necessarily in the general public. All of you understand how the GO bond issues work, and that they come every few years, and Oklahoma City's had a pretty good track record of getting good interest rates, getting them paid off, and being able to submit a new one to voters without raising taxes. Do all of you understand that? Okay, but there are some questions as to what is going to happen with the next bond issue. So the question is, when was the last Oklahoma City general obligation bond issue passed? And more importantly, what is the status of planning for the next GO bond issue? And can we get an answer from both of you?
Sure. 2007 was the last general obligation bond issue, and the status of planning for it is that we have this document that has a guide about capital improvements, so that the process may be a little bit more robust in going forward. We're going to be having a public outreach process and trying to get input into the next GO bond issue. We also know that city departments maintain lists of needs, and the city departments will submit those lists as well as getting more information from the community. So all of those proposed projects that are going to come in that are going to exceed the amount of money that we could actually put into a bond will be filtered through several different stages, several different steps in the process. And the comprehensive plan's guidance on prioritization is a newer step in that process.
So I think as you see Aubrey and I today, there's actually a number of other department directors that are involved in the planning for the next bond issue. So you have all of the major departments that also include parks, transit. We also have our finance and budget department that are very in tune with what's going on. So there are some questions that are coming up that are going to hopefully be answered by the City Council in the next several months as we make these plans. But some of those questions are, what is the length of the next bond issue? Is it another 10-year bond? Is it something that's a 10-year plan? Is it a 7-year, perhaps maybe as short as a 5-year? You know, one of the challenges that we sometimes have with our bond issues is that the millage is set, and that's a commitment that the council has made to the voters. And so it's a campaign opportunity to go out and say, we're not raising taxes, vote this bond issue, and here's the list of projects that we can bring out. But one of the things it does is it sets the amount of sale each year. And so sometimes we're limited in that. This bond issue 2007 is probably going to take us a couple of extra years to complete, only because of the recession that we saw in 2008 and 2009. The sales dipped considerably because we had fixed the millage rate. There's projects that were voted in 2007 we haven't yet started. Okay, so we're over the 50% mark on completing those projects, but there's still a number of projects remaining that we're going to continue to build out till about 2020. So we're still several years away from actually finishing that bond issue. But I think what's important is the planning is underway for the next one because there is capacity in the finances for the city. There's this ability to ask some really unique questions to the City Council as we move forward to help get that next set of projects, those needed projects for Oklahoma City, whether they're in streets, whether they're in parks, whether they're in transit, whether it's in economic development, whether it's police, whether it's fire, all those things I think you can expect to come out. You're going to have opportunity as leaders. You're going to have opportunity also as the public to see a lot like what was done in Plan OKC with a series of either workshops that you can come to at times that are convenient for you. There's going to be opportunities for neighborhood meetings, and you're also going to see some online options available. Maybe even some things that are like surveys on your smartphone asking you what projects do you think are important and what would you like to see on the next Oklahoma City ballot for the 2017 bond issue. So all of that is coming very, very quickly. I would suspect you'll start getting some of those announcements in just the next few short months, probably near the end of the summer.
I'm going to do another ambush. Jim, you knew it had to come. You know, these bond issues have built libraries, they've built police stations, fire stations, not just roads and infrastructure. But as you watch other communities, knowing the history of Oklahoma City, getting a bond issue passed is not always a done deal. Can you talk about just how critical these are to Oklahoma City and just what the alternate life would have been for the city if some of these hadn't passed in recent years?
It's our funding source for capital improvements of the basic type, not water. Water and airports pay out of their own revenues, but for everything else, streets, drainage, bridges, traffic improvements, police substations, fire stations. Last time we did buses in the GO bonds, parks, park improvements, certainly a significant area. It's our funding source, and we have had good citizen confidence and good voter numbers on the last two bond issues we had, both the 2000 and 2007. And I think if we're responsible and put together a package that meets what the citizens want, and it's, you know, we do a citizen survey every year, and every year the number one issue with our citizens is road conditions, not widening roads, not, you know, more turnpikes or anything like that. It's road conditions. They want resurfacing by a huge margin. Number two is actually road capacity, getting around. Number three is public safety, and number four is public transit. And then it drops off quickly after that.
Have you seen public transit rise up from that?
It has. Public transit has risen over since we've been doing the surveys. It's gone up quite a bit over the last 6 or 7 years.
Well, Eric, I'm going to ask your boss. There's a question from a person you're asking. Where does public transit fit into
Well, and I'd be happy to, I mean,
How much priority is it starting to take next?
well, it's going to be in there to purchase new buses. We can't pay for operations in a bond issue. It can only be for capital improvements. And for transit, those capital improvements are buses. But the council, every year, except maybe this year because of the budget downfall that we've had, have added resources for public transportation to provide more routes, smarter routes, more bus shelters, provide nighttime service, weekend service. We're adding new services with the transit system. We have a long ways to go. It's hard to provide transit services in Oklahoma City, really for two reasons. One is because of lack of density that you highlighted in your article yesterday. And the second is that we don't have traffic issues here. I mean, you can go up Broadway and you can get at 5 o'clock and yeah, it's a little touchy. And there's other places around that. But you ever been to Dallas at 5 o'clock on a Friday night? Or Friday, or 2 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I mean, yeah.
No offense, Evan.
So the fact of the matter is you can get around Oklahoma City relatively easily and plenty of parking downtown and relatively inexpensive. There's not the incentive out there for your regular downtown commuters to use public transit. A lot of people do, but until some of those factors change, it's going to be hard to build a robust system, although the council has prioritized it in recent years.
And I'll ask Aubrey this, but there is a population in our city, the working poor, and they need public transit. It's got nothing to do with ease or quickness. So, Aubrey, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I wanted to maybe talk quickly about piggybacking on what Jim said with public transportation, in that we can't really rely on the GO bond to help fund all of the public transportation and transit improvements to our city, and so therefore we're constantly looking for opportunities to get grants. One of the grants that we just got was from Smart Growth America, and it was looking at the Northwest corridor. So we're trying to look ahead into the future and trying to get transit in place where we know we need to bring people from the core of our downtown to places where they might work, extending out from the neighborhoods and the populations that live in Northwest Oklahoma City and getting them to downtown. So wherever we can get funding outside of the GO bond, we're going to try to supplement that with what we can get in the GO bond. And so that's where the planning comes in to play, looking at those populations that would be responsive populations and trying to figure out what they need in order to get to where they need to go. So that's an effort that we have to really do the crystal ball thing. We also have to do some technical types of analysis and work with our transit agencies and looking at a regional type of transportation initiatives as well. But it is one of those things too that, as Jim mentioned, is a challenge for us, in that if we don't have the density and we don't have the numbers with a very, very expensive prospect like that, it's years away, even though we think we should have been planning it 20 years ago.
We have a question from online. I swear I didn't ask this, but I've asked it in the past. Why widen, Eric? Why not go for skinnier roads? Why not put the street in front of my neighborhood on diet? It was just widened to 5 lanes, surrounded by neighborhoods. Could we petition to have one of those switch to a bike lane?
So if you've not noticed, in downtown Oklahoma City, we've actually narrowed most of the streets in downtown. That's something that we've gone through some traffic studies and analysis. We've, again, worked with a lot of other models, and you're going to find 11-foot lanes in the majority of downtown now, especially as a part of Project 180, where those existed as 12 and 13s before. You know, as we go out into Oklahoma City and we start looking outside of the urban core, we do look at certain opportunities to narrow lanes again. You're seeing that happen on Western Avenue from 41st to 45th. There's actually a narrowing that's occurred there. You're also seeing that on Broadway Avenue through Automobile Alley, which wasn't specifically a 180 street, but one that we've also narrowed and added on-street parking. So I think as you see opportunities, we are looking at different studies. I mean, in a lot of cases, it depends on the speed limit of the street as to how much that we can narrow. When we actually look at different capacities and whether or not you need a 5th lane or a center turn lane through a neighborhood, so this would be Western Avenue from 164th to 178th. You know, we find ourselves with a situation in far north central Oklahoma City where that entire mile is residential after residential after residential, with a lot of different drives serving hundreds of residents in that area. You know, the traffic model there showed that it needed a center turn lane for safety, and it was added as a part of that project. So it's not the norm that we always put in that 5th lane, but when it's justified, we do look at that. Traditional widening, we just also looked at one on, this would be Britton Road, just west of Lake Hefner. It was originally scheduled as a 4-lane widening. We did a restudy and found that it didn't actually need all 4 lanes, so it was converted to a 3-lane with bicycle lanes on both sides. So we really look at each of these individually as projects. There isn't a one-size-fits-all in Oklahoma City. We work very closely with the communities to do what's best, and I think you'll find that also going forward in future projects.
So the answer is, you definitely are putting some roads on diets. You've reduced some. Next question. Aubrey, when putting this plan, the OKC plan together, how much was promoting diversity considered, and what mechanisms were put in place to accomplish this? Did that come up?
Yeah, that's actually one of the charges that planners have to swear by oath that they do in working with the community. It came up for every element, for every chapter, for everything we think about diversity, not just diversity of we think about age, and we think about income levels, and we think about gender. We think about all of the ways that people need to experience this city for every aspect of the city. So that's one of the themes throughout Plan OKC, is that this is a city that's built for everyone. We need a transportation system that works for everyone. So we have to think about people of different physical abilities and how they get around the city, and that's, I don't know how else to answer it other than it's a very general, widespread philosophy that we have to think about as we build our city.
I've got just 2 more questions from folks. We're going to have to answer them pretty quick. The comprehensive plan, someone notes, is implemented by the zoning code and subdivision code, and that's correct. But they want to know, what is plan and timing to have these documents updated to support the comp plan? So, for example, Commissioner John Yokel was saying, yeah, it's great that we've got this new comprehensive plan, but now we need to catch up the ordinances and the zoning. Is there an effort ongoing on that?
Yes, there is. In fact, we're going to be beginning that effort this year, so it's probably a multi-phase effort. There are a lot of rules and regulations that play into what development looks like, where it goes, how it's formed. So cities across the United States that have adopted zoning codes, it's called the Euclidean zoning model, where you have zoning districts that allow commercial development here, office development here, residential development here, are starting to realize that those models are a little bit too strict. They need to be more flexible. They need to allow for creativity and mixes of uses, which is what we want to promote for our city as it moves forward. So we're going back through a consultant process of looking at our codes, looking at the goals and the intentions and the policy of the comprehensive plan to make sure that we are allowing that type of development to occur, that we don't have any barriers through our codes, and if there are, we'd like to remove those barriers to quality development. So I think in the next year, it's going to be the diagnostic phase of looking at sections of our code that we can kind of bring up to the next level of where Oklahoma City is going. Then after that process of identifying where they need to be, we're going to be working in the community with stakeholders, with developers, on what that actually looks like, what those ordinances might need to be tweaked on, what the zoning districts, we need to start looking at zoning in a different way, if it's more of a form-based approach to zoning, or if it's a flexible hybrid type of zoning system. So those are the conversations going to be playing out in the next couple of years, and we really do hope that all of you can kind of keep your radar tuned to that so that you can help us with that effort.
Before I get to my final question, just note either broker, developer, landowner involved in the Rockwell Memorial property where I talked about the empty intersection with the traffic lights. They indicate that property is under contract and they're planning to do something soon. So in all fairness, we need to note that. Okay, final question. I like this. What choices specifically and logistically would you suggest for developers to endeavor to or in order to help our city grow smarter?
Well, that's the question of the year here. That's always the question we ask developers. What do you need from us? What can we do for you? It comes down to incentives. It comes down to financing. We do, I think, have a very specific and limited set of tools to help incentivize development in Oklahoma City. Probably not that different from other cities, but because we have TIF that we can utilize, it's only for specific parts of Oklahoma City. We don't have other types of financial really means to fund development where we want it to go. We are looking at other models. We are constantly open and exploring different ways to do that, but building in incentives to getting growth where we want it to go is one of those dilemmas that I think planners and developers have been talking about for the past 5 years. I really don't know what we can do to change that process right now other than remove barriers that are going to limit where development goes and what it looks like. That's step one. That's something, you know, administrative and regulatory and easy for the city to do. Those other dynamics are difficult. Do you want to add?
Well, I think, and I see a number of faces that we've worked different development partnerships just in this room, but I think one of the things moving forward is just to understand that through the plan and through what you see and through the details that we're requesting, you can help us as a city and we can help you as a developer be a lot more successful as you're developing those final plans and you're getting those to the city for submittal either through planning or through public works, knowing what the expectations of the city are already. So I think gone are the days where you ask for some sort of a fee in lieu of sidewalk, where you just don't want to build the sidewalk. Sidewalks are required. You know, it doesn't matter if you're in downtown Oklahoma City or in suburban Oklahoma City, you have to build the sidewalk. But it's also building a quality sidewalk, not just laying down concrete. It's making sure that as you start to see the city grow into more of a streetscapes perspective, where we're talking again about more complete streets where they're walkable and you're looking at trees and shading and things like bicycle paths, that comes in as a part of the plan and that we're not asking you for it. So I think as developers moving forward into the future, we'd like to see a lot more of those creative ideas coming forward that we can approve. I think, again, it makes it a kind of a holistic approach as just a city as a whole.
And I think we have seen a lot of developers lately that know if they come in early that we're going to be there to help you. We're going to be there to guide you through a process that oftentimes is very difficult and that you hit a stumbling block when you come to a certain point. You really need help from city staff. A lot of the type of development we want to encourage is infill development, and those projects typically are a little bit more complicated than doing something on a greenfield site because you're going to have infrastructure issues, possible rezoning issues, possible overlap of multiple zoning districts with a process behind each. So we're here to help you and guide you through that process, maybe help you identify any grants or other sources for your project if you're eligible for those. So I would say an early dialogue is probably one of the best things we can do in working together.
And final note, something that a lot of you might be interested in, whereas in the late 90s, communication between planning and public works was hit or miss, how often do you guys meet now?
Well, I know that Eric and I are in meetings together maybe 3-4 times a week or more. We've been together since 8 o'clock. We see each other pretty much every day, have a meeting together several times a week, and we communicate, I think, very well, and we're kind of in time talking about things as they come up in real time. He has my cell phone number, I have his, we can text each other, and it's a really good working relationship, and it's not just that way between me and Eric, but it's multiple departments. We really are having a lot more opportunity to keep up with things. One of the things I might mention is that the 2 assistant city managers that manage multiple departments, including public works and planning, meet once a month now. This is a new joint dialogue between all of the department heads under each of those assistant city managers, and they're the departments that really deal on the front line of development in different aspects. So parks and recreation, utilities, transit, public works, planning, airports. So once a month, we all sit around the table together, and if there's anything going on, we're able to talk about it with our other department heads to keep them in the loop. I think that's a big improvement.
4,000 employees, 620 miles. Oh, how many customers? About more than 500,000. Yeah, I don't want your job.
I'll use this one, Mike, or Steve. Just want to give everybody a quick round of applause. Thank you for coming. I do know there are a couple of visitors from outside of our community with us today, and I just was thinking how great of a reflection it is on Oklahoma City that we can get almost 90 people to an event like this to come and talk about how we want our community to grow. So I think we should take some pride in that. As the ULI chair, I just want to mention a couple of other things that are coming up. First off, the series is going to continue in the paper. You're going to be doing some sections on transportation, parks. What else was there?
Did a lot of work with Mr. O'Connor at ACOG, and we've got a lot of stuff coming up on that. Also, retail corridors, especially the faded ones, and what the city's looking at and trying to do to turn that around.
So we have talked about maybe doing a wrap-up event. If you're reading the series and anything strikes you as you wanting to know more about, please don't hesitate to let Steve or Cameron or myself or Deshaun know what you're interested in hearing about. Other events, this Thursday we have the Taco Crawl, which is going to be a way to showcase some of the efforts on Southwest 29th Street. They're trying to organize a business improvement district down there, and we wanted to make sure that people were getting a chance to go down and see and meet some of the people that are part of that effort. We'll be taking a break in July with our programming, but we'll be back in August. Our back-to-school book club will be back. It'll be Jeanette Sadiq Khan's Street Fight. I had never read the subtitle. It's called The Handbook for an Urban Revolution. So we'll be probably splitting that up into 3 parts, and we hope you can take part in that as well. One last bit of housekeeping. As you're leaving, we'll be happy to recycle your name tag, so you can leave your name tag where you picked it up on the way in. So thank you very much for coming out.